May I teach you the gospel, Jesus' gospel, the gospel he discovered for us, the way Newton discovered gravity for us, and Einstein discovered for us the theory of relativity. I couldn't have taught it to you a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, or a year ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 61 years ago. But I can teach it to you now because I finally get it. There was nothing magical. Not all that many years ago, a fellow that grew up in one of the premier ski areas in the Rockies was skiing with me, and he said, "You're the greatest skier I've ever seen." Now, this is a boy that was born in New Jersey. And his overprivileged life, and by the way, me being the boy, his overprivileged life enabled him to ski some of the greatest ski areas in the Northeast and the West and Europe. But I didn't live in those areas. I didn't have nearly the exposure that some do, the time to learn. But I believed I could learn, and I was obsessed with it, including lying in bed many nights in New Jersey in the summertime, obsessed with visioning going down runs. That's where I really learned to ski, was in my imagination, which is where great athletes, for example, learn much of their craft. Well, it's been decades, or at least a decade, since I've had any interest in skiing. But for as long as I can remember, as the littlest boy, I was drawn to Jesus' gospel. My heart was drawn to Jesus' gospel. And at some level, I understood it. Many of us understand it when we're young. But the massive errors, the life that's been sucked out of it by my brothers and sisters that consider themselves the church, the so-called Christian church, which objectively, absolutely, was created to smother the life out of Christ's teaching. That was the deal, or Constantine was going to destroy all remnants. It had to become something that no longer created people that a government couldn't control. And the church leaders subconsciously and consciously agreed to that bargain and buried Christ's teachings under outdated Hebrew teachings and new teachings not of Jesus, not of Christ, from Paul, John, and others. Killing the life out of it. And so it's been for 1800 years. But because of my saintly dad, more than most, I was able to see Jesus, and I was able to see the gospel, but not so much that I could retain the courage of my vision, and I didn't for 30, 40 years. Do you recall that whenever Jesus was asked to prove his teaching, he always responded in the same way? The proof of my teaching is within you. That was always his answer. I thought that was a trick on words. Earlier in my life. Not just that, I couldn't dismiss it, but that was the best I could understand, that it was some sort of trick of words, some sort of circular logic. But it's not. What he was saying was, okay, you've had your eyes closed since you were born, and you're now 12 years old. I'm telling you that if you open your eyes, you will find your ability to navigate the material world around you is beyond anything that you could imagine. And the person to whom he's speaking says, well, what's the proof? And he answers honestly, the proof is in your trying. The proof is within you, or there's no proof. This is precisely Jesus' teaching, but it was not about the teaching of our eyes. It was about the teaching of our heart. Do you remember how he speaks of flesh? Don't we moralize that? Hasn't the church moralized that into some abstract, abhorrent, pernicious thing? What he was referring to is our senses. And what is at the root of those senses, which is our neurological sense or capacity for fleshly concerns. There's nothing per se bad about that or per se good about that, any more than there's something per se good or bad about eyesight. It's a dominant or potentially dominant, one of the two dominant spirits within us, by whatever name, but fleshly concerns is a pretty good one. Given to us by creation, and in every beast, a concern for food, procreation, safety, comfort, pleasure. And to say that it's a spirit certainly is not to say that it is something mystical. A canine, a dog, can be in a spirit of playfulness. We can all witness that. Or it can be in a spirit of fear. We can all witness that. There's nothing mystical about that. And those who, prior to our developments in psychology and neurology, etc., in recent decades and centuries, is to be forgiven to thinking that it was mystical, as people were to be forgiven eons ago to think that fire was mystical or the stars. They're to be credited with realizing something's going on here. But there's nothing mystical about it. It's a feature of our nervous system. Our fleshly concerns, by whatever name. Obvious in all creatures. Obvious that the sane person would have them reign supreme. But not obvious to Jesus that the fleshly concerns would reign supreme. In fact, he came to see that we're not designed to have them reign supreme. That is not our nature. It is our capacity. It is not our nature. Now, I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but he's 2,000 years ago. He doesn't have the benefit of today's science, and he rightly said, we're told, if you love me, you will do greater works than these, because I die and you remain alive. You can keep learning. You can keep building. Well, we have 2,000 years worth of learning that we can apply. and it's in line with any logic, any reason, any evolutionary biology or psychology that I know. Not that I'm an authority in those areas. That a reason or the reason that any species, particularly the human species, exists today is because it has an internal compass, an internal spirit, in addition to the fleshly concerns. Why does a mother cat go into a burning building to save her kittens, which is contrary to all of her spirit of fleshly concern? Why did Teacher Soto in Newtown, Connecticut yesterday shield her students with her body, losing her life in the process? That was clearly counter to her fleshly concern. So relative to Jesus' gospel, this is to say that he spoke of centrally these two spirits, the spirit of fleshly concern, which is creation given, which is DNA given within us. It's a feature of our species and all species. And the spirit of creation, the spirit of the Creator, by whatever name, but that's pretty good names, pretty descriptive. So that mother cat goes into the burning building to save her kittens, not because of the spirit of her fleshly concerns, but because of the spirit of the Creator that is within her. The Creator. Okay, so some being? Not as far as I'm concerned. I think that's pagan rubbish. But what I can say with greater authority is that if those in Jesus' day were correct, that Jehovah meant the almighty power that all of us feel and no one will ever be able to name, that what we can honestly seek to understand within us is not just our capacity for seeing or our capacity for hearing or our capacity for taste, but our capacity, which is our mental capacity to experience that creative force. Is gravity some sentient being that devotes itself to keeping us adherent to Earth and not floating away? I don't think so, but my God, it's a real force. Some force caused that mother cat to go in and get her kittens, contrary to what her fleshly desires would have her do. Wouldn't it be absurd if any creature did not have a microprocessor subsystem within it that was the embodiment of the wisdom of creation that had created the physical world? It wouldn't make sense. It would be like giving someone a sailboat and putting them in it in a storm with absolutely no knowledge of sailing. I'm not talking sentient force here, but evolution has worked with incredible wisdom, near perfect, virtually perfect by anything we can imagine. it wouldn't make sense that that hadn't been built into us any more than it wouldn't make sense that eyesight hadn't been built into us, or sense of hearing, or sense of smell or taste. Wouldn't make any sense. It's insane that if we have two dominant spirits in us, that we would not have the fleshly spirit reign. And so we lived until Jesus' day. But Jesus' discovery was, no. What's insane is to live as though the fleshly spirit should reign. That sanity, that health, that joy, that salvation from personal suffering, let alone collective suffering, is in every breath, every second, having the spirit of the Creator within each of us. Best understood, I think, as our capacity for universal loving. To have that reign every breath, every second. That is sanity, unless needless suffering is sanity. Personal suffering, anxiety, depression, sense of meaninglessness, obsession with our aches and pains, internal turmoil, lives of anxiety. That is testament by being the most self-medicated culture there's ever been here in the West, is rife in our lives. We're in the Matrix, friends. We exist only with the crutches of our entertainment, our pharmaceuticals, our alcohol, our fleshly relief from time to time, sex, pretty houses, pretty clothes. These are all drugs. I didn't say they're bad. Maybe it's not bad to be an alcoholic. Some of us think it's bad. Jesus said then and would say now, we're self-medicating because we are not. We are living according to the suboptimal spirit. That's insane. He said absolutely, completely, totally, we are designed to live by, always in charge, our spirit of loving. In the same way a sailor in a sailboat out by the storm is designed to live by the truth of where the wind is blowing, the truth of where the rocks are. And to every second have that dictate what she or he does. In exactly the same way, we are designed, Jesus' gospel says, his teaching says, his life says, we are designed to never subordinate to the illusion that we are creatures of head and flesh. And if we always have the spirit of loving, the highest form of human intelligence, the form of human intelligence that uses all of the other faculties that we've been given to their optimal every second, that if we live in that way, then we live as the sailor that uses every ounce of ability they have to understand the direction of the wind, to understand the dimensions of sailing, to understand where the rocks are. What a infinitely happier sailor and crew and set of passengers than one that has some other imagining of what's important. This is the gospel, friends, and it's rubbish. Unless were you, as did Jesus, to go with it, to follow his teaching, which says, only if you try what I'm saying will you understand the truth or the error thereof. If there's a proof to my teaching, it's in trying it. And if in the trying of it, the true trying of it, the deep trying of it, the knock and keep knocking until you're certain you've gotten to where truth would lie, then make your judgment. That's the gospel. That the Creator So, does it really make sense that which makes the most sense, that we were created by a thinking, a sentient being and we're not given as we were given the internal capacity for taste and smell and sight and touch, we were not given an internal capacity directly analogous to those to move in the direction of an ever more successful creation, that the only internal sense we were given was, and the internal sense we were given which was to be dominant, was of a selfish self, a self concerned with our own flesh. Isn't that a way of describing a dominant Western notion of God? Would evolution do that? I won't justify the absurd notion of a sentient being doing that. That's just absurd paganism. And Jesus said so in so many words. Does it make sense that the spirit within us that should be dominant, the one of fleshly concerns, does it make sense that's the case, that unlike virtually all species, including of plants, that have as a dominant concern the well-being of the species over and above itself, does it make any sense at all that we're some sort of evolutionary leap from that? Or a regression from that? Does that make sense? What we are living culturally and personally in the Western world as what makes sense is that, yes, indeed, that which is concrete to us, that which is in our face, our fleshly concerns, absolutely should be dominant. But Jesus says that's a mistake. It's a mistake in the sense that it is not the yoke that we're designed for. It is being in the sailboat with voluntarily, with no knowledge of how to sail or where the rocks are or what wind is about or what sails do, that which is full of suffering. That it's as wrong-headed as thinking that our eyes are not something that we should use dominant in physically navigating the world, or that we shouldn't have dominant our sense of hearing when it relates to things that are hearing. He's simply saying that the spirit of loving, the spirit of creation that is accessible within every one of us, the same way our eyesight is accessible with every one of us, the same way our concern for our fleshly well-being is available with every one of us, that spirit of creation, that spirit of loving, is what with every breath in every second should predominate in the sane, enlightened individual who thereby chooses joy and peace of heart and vitality and love as a way of being over Pinocchio's pleasure island. This is the gospel, friends. That we have the capacity to invent for ourselves dozens of different gods or things that we worship. Clothes, cars, sex, success, buildings, long life. And Jesus' discovery for us is those are all paths of misery compared with every breath, every second, living out of the spirit of loving. That's the gospel. Gee, of course you have the right to disagree. Of course you may see it differently. Of course you may see it the same and be way ahead of me, but I see very few people that understand it. And I've never read in one place what I've just told you. Nor would I be able to tell you what I've just told you if it weren't for the saints, for Tolstoy, for the life of people like Diane Wilson and Rachel Corrie and Eleanor Roosevelt. But the words I've just told you, I don't, a year from now, if I'm alive then, 10 years from now, if I'm alive then, I may be able to improve on somewhat, but that's the deal. That's the gospel. That's it. The clearest secondary source to go from what I've just told you is the writings of Tolstoy, Gospel in Brief and The Kingdom of God is Within You. That unlike the Gospels you're familiar with, which have come through thousands of hands over thousands of years, was Tolstoy, that greatest of all intellects, going to the original Greek texts, which are the source of the Gospels you're more familiar with, and not as a committee, but as a heart that otherwise was going to commit suicide, looking for the truth of what Jesus had to say. To me, it's an infinitely clearer vision as to what Jesus' gospel actually was. I'd like to know your thoughts, particularly if you find that you deeply attempt to find in your own life what I've just described for you and what Jesus much earlier described.